Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the seventh episode of the AI Valuation Code. Thank you, Matteo, for joining us. How are you today?
Not too bad. Thank you very much, Margaret, for having me today.
Great having you, and lovely to see everybody joining us on this Monday morning. Okay, so today, last week we discussed that we would go practical. So I wanted to start the conversation by talking about something that I see again and again in the transactions. A company comes to the market, they usually have a strong story, decent revenue, even some intellectual property. When discussing with the founders, they usually tell us that they own their own IP and that they are protected or they feel protected. And to start the conversation is always reassuring that, right? But when we start looking at the due diligence, the assumption breaks down very quickly because in a digital and AI driven world, ownership is not the same thing as control. And control is very different from monetization. And I'm very sad to say, but investors, what they're really buying is not ownership. They're buying the certainty of a future value, right? So lowering your risk. Matteo, from your experience as a CFO, why do so many businesses confuse legal ownership with actual economic control?
Yeah, this is such an important question, this, because some time ago I actually an article about control over ownership, and I was just giving a very glamorous example. Formula One, for example, yeah, Formula One
Mhm.
controls, without money, without really, without really owning the overall circuit. They actually control their own IP, and they actually distribute the right to someone else, really, and they monetize it like that. So yeah, control is exactly what investor are looking for. Now, let me tell you the reason why. Because historically, it was enough to say, "Well, I own it," because that's what the economy, many years ago. So let's say if you had a patent, then you had a contract. If you had legal protection, so you could assume that value would follow, yeah. But that's part of a world that, let's face it, does no longer exist, because we're now living in a world that is dominated by the intangible economy, and because artificial intelligence has also introduced something completely new, continuous creation of value. Last week we were talking about static IP versus dynamic IP. So it's not as if, you file your IP and that's it, there's no more value that is going to be created by the IP. Today, IP is dynamic, you start somewhere with data, algorithm will continue, and then you monetize it. And if value is continuously created, it must be continuously controlled, yeah? So you can't say, I've done my job, it's in my office, I'll go back to it in the next 10 years when it expires. It just doesn't work like that, because you have to continue to create, you have to continue to control.
I think that really resonates with me. Makes a lot of sense. Let's start the topic straight in with our audience. So we want you involved from the beginning. How confident are you today that you fully control your intellectual property? Option A, fully controlled. Option B, partially controlled. Option C, mostly unclear. Let me repeat the answers. Fully controlled, partially controlled, or mostly unclear. If you could type your answer in the comments, um, we'll be very grateful. Hi, very interesting answers coming through.
Yeah, interesting about checking if you really control your IP, or you partially control, or you don't even know, you're not clear. So A, fully controlled, B, partially controlled, and C, mostly unclear.
Right.
Um, I would go deeper into this misunderstanding, really, because why? Why am I saying that? Because, most businesses, they still define intellectual property in very narrow terms. Okay. What do I mean by this? They talk about code, they talk about patents, they talk about brand, yeah? But as I said, we live in a different world now. We live in an artificial intelligence driven environment. Intellectual property expands into something much, much broader. Why? Why? Um, I mean, I'll give you an example what it really includes. It includes your data sets, your customer interactions. You might think, oh, well, there's no IP. That's your IP. I mean, you need to really discover really the meaning of IP, really. What about your learning models? Yeah. You develop something that, gave you more knowledge, more know-how, um, because know-how is not something that is static again, it's something that continues to evolve. Your internal processes, you do something in a unique manner, that's also part of your IP. And your outputs, there is a really world out there. And I dare to say this is where most of the wealth creation is going to happen for many for the next few years and decades, I would say. If you want to conquer artificial intelligence, you must really change your mind about what really intellectual property means to you.
Absolutely. I entirely agree.
Hmm.
So from a deal perspective, we usually see that companies are really underestimating their IP. I think this highlights two significant problems. First, they undervalue themselves. And second, and even more dangerously, they fail to protect what actually matters, right? So Matteo, if a business does not clearly identify those IP layers, what is the immediate risk?
I have to say this in AI-driven economies, risk is getting much more substantial than before we started to really have AI embedded into our economies, really. Um, the immediate risk is really leakage. Um, let me expand on this. Okay. So value is being created, but then it's not captured. Okay, because there is a tendency not to document it as well. Uh, and anything that is not captured cannot be monetized because it's not documented. Now, that's the big risk, yeah. So I would like to give this message to the audience, really. Think about your business right now. Think about what is actually generating value, okay? Ask yourself this question. Um, is it number one, your product? Number one, your data? Number three, your system? Or number four, your people? Okay. Uh, this will be quite a discovery. I mean, in terms of you start to really check, what is actually generating the value in your business. I just gonna want to repeat this, your product, your data, your system, or your people. So please type your answer. Be very interesting to
So
find out. Yeah.
it's quite a provocative statement or question that we have here for our audience. And while we give them a little bit of time to think about it and to type their answers, Matteo, you just recently released your book, Felt Pivot Scale. Could you tell us more about it?
Thank you very much, Margaret. Yeah, this is effectively, I've been speaking yesterday to three people who are all reading the book, at the time, at the moment, which for me I was so proud of it. Now, felt pivot scale effectively is the idea about the content of the book started in 2017 because I wrote a program for the University of Plymouth in that particular time. And the reason why I wrote that program for the university is because the question was why is there not really a recognizable recipe for entrepreneurs, for founders, but also finance professional to create wealth, but with financial intelligence. So that's why I created the High Valuation Triangle, which is a system designed to reverse engineer what investors and banks want from a business. So the question is, what do they want? And I came up with this system based on three key pillars of success, which are number one, intellectual property as a wealth creator, really, in our economy. Number two is succession planning and leadership depth. And number three is global markets. And because we live in AI-driven economies, this has become so much more urgent to release. So it matters so much more now than it used to matter even before. Because let's face it, many people say artificial intelligence is the new electricity. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, if artificial intelligence is the new electricity, then the high variation triangle has to be the grid for the electricity, because it allows the electricity, in this case, obviously the business, to have a generator, which is the intellectual property, which gives you the ownership. Yeah. Answer the question, what do you own? Number two, the other question is the transformer, which is leadership depth. So he answered the question, how does it transfer value? And the third question is, how does it scale global positioning? So that's how the high valuation triangle becomes actually the grid of the electricity, which is the artificial intelligence. And I'm so happy that you gave me this opportunity to actually release this 90 seconds.
Thank you, Matteo. I think a lot of people talk about these concepts individually, but it's the first time that I actually hear how everything is connected and how this could create so much more value for the companies if they know how to unlock the grid. Okay, this being said, we're going to start looking more in depth of one of the forms of IP monetization. We're going to be looking at licensing because this is exactly where it becomes tangible from the a valuation perspective. So from your experience, Matteo, why is licensing such a powerful tool in today's environment?
Yeah, this is so connected with the high valuation triangle. The reason why licensing is such a powerful model is because it does three things simultaneously. The first one is it decouples revenue from cost. Then it enables global scalability without operational expansion. Okay. Again, scalability is what investors are looking for. You know, if you really want to find investor money, you need to show that you're scalable. And licensing is such an important model. The other one is it does transform intellectual property into recurring revenue. It creates predictability as well as scalability. And that's really what investors are looking for, what banks are looking for when you go and talk to your bank about funding as well. They want to see that, in a few words, you're quite boring because you're predictable. There's no surprise, yeah? The moment you become unpredictable is the moment, obviously, you're not bankable. And this actually, I was actually thinking about a question for you, Margaret. Would you agree? Because obviously, because of your experience as an investor in a mergers and acquisition, would you agree that licensing is often misunderstood as a legal tool rather than a commercial strategy?
Um, Absolutely. And I wouldn't even dare to say it. It's a very expensive misunderstanding. Um, when we look at businesses and transaction, licensing is basically one of the clearest signs of maturity of a business, right? What it signals the buyer is that this business has understood how to monetize their own IP. And so it is basically scalable and it's transferable. So in investors' eyes, this is just lower risk. Makes a lot of sense for a buyer to look at a business this way. Now, let me give you a challenging question, Matteo. If licensing is so powerful, why do you think that so few businesses actually implement it effectively?
Yeah, this goes back to the five steps of intellectual property. After you protect it, you need to commercially embed it, yeah? And what happens that so many times businesses are still thinking in terms of selling products, okay? They're not thinking in terms of distributing systems. And and that's really the reason why. I mean, I always say that there are so many ways to monetize your intellectual property, to commercially embed it. Uh, there is a need for a lot more education about this, definitely.
I definitely agree with you. Let's ask the audience opinion. Um, do you currently generate revenue from licensing? Yes, actively. Option A. Option B, not yet. Option C, it's not applicable. Please put your answers in the comments. We're really looking forward to see how you see licensing as an opportunity.
Yeah, I have to say this. This is such an important question because it's one of the biggest hidden opportunities in most businesses. If only they could grasp how they can actually commercially embed the intellectual property.
I entirely agree, and it's a shame because it's basically an opportunity that's just missed, right? To not only increase your revenue but also um, increase your valuation.
Mm. I would say this, now that we are talking about this, let's talk about protection. Because artificial intelligence introduces a completely different level of complexity that did not exist before, yeah? Like to ask a question, Margaret. What are, in your view, obviously, the biggest risks you see emerging in AI-driven businesses when it comes to protection?
Um, it's a very good question. I would say that three of them stand out immediately. The first one would be unclear ownership of data. That is a clear risk. The second is the dependency on external AI platform, extremely risky. Um, and the third would be the ambiguity around outputs, really. This being said, Matteo, uh, how should businesses think about protection differently?
Yeah, again, another uh, question that requires a lot of thinking. I would say this, what you were saying before, I highlights the need to understand also the difference between AI IP and AI usage, which is spoken
Mhm.
about last week, when you were talking about the risk, so that's a strong comment because I've had some comments from some of you, some of the audience today, telling how important it is to make that distinction clear. So AI usage versus AI IP. Um, so our businesses should think about protection differently. The question is, they need to move really from legal protection, which is what they tend to be worried about, yeah, to control architecture. Okay. What does it mean? It means really understanding every layer of value creation, uh, also defining ownership of each layer, not just one layer, okay?
Mm.
And then embedded this into a contracts and system. So after you define it, it needs to be embedded into contracts and system.
Mm.
Um, would you agree that most businesses are currently exposed without realizing it?
Absolutely. And when we look at the outcome of a due diligence, it becomes really visible, and businesses realize their exposure, but they have already lost on valuation, right? It's a risk. Um, we're going to take this little time to ask again the audience participation. Um, one very important question: if um, if your AI is actually creating value today, who owns the output? And that comes back to the discussion we had earlier. Is it one, your business, two, the platform provider, or three, it's shared, unclear, I don't know. Let me repeat the answers again. Your business owns the output, the platform provider owns it, or shared, unknown, unclear.
I have to say, once again, we are going back to the strong subject about AI IP and AI usage. For the audience, the takeaway is be absolutely 100% sure about the difference, okay? As we said last week and we said again today, AI IP is when you own AI. AI usage is when you're using a platform, and obviously, you do not own the output. The output is owned by the platform, okay? So that's really important because it makes such a big difference to your business, to the valuation, to the fundability, to the investability. Because the situation is not just protection, it is structured control. Okay. And in actual fact, I can see that people are voting here. They all say platform provider, which is, is not a surprise here. There's a lot of education here, which is why, you're gonna be able to talk to us about these things, ask us question. Don't hesitate to ask us question directly, direct messages, comment. You got our details, so feel free to do that, you know. Um, yeah, I was talking about the solution is not just protection, but it's structured control, okay? And the question for you, Margaret, is what does strong intellectual property control look like in a transaction like you did in the past, or you're doing it right now? Yeah.
Pick in one word, it would be clarity, right? So we would have clear ownership of the data, clear rights over the models, and clear rights over the outputs. Um, Most importantly, it's clear monetization pathways, right? We keep saying this, but evaluation will rise and it's very dependent on the risk. The lower the risk, the higher your valuation. And monetization is one of the very smart tools to lower risk and increase your valuation. So, Matteo, let's go to the beginning. Um, where would you start as a CFO?
Okay, well, I would say this. I would really always look the designing approach, okay? I would map the entire intellectual property flow, okay?
Mhm.
So I would start from where the data enters, and then I would carry on. How, after it enters, how is it processed? Where is the intelligence created? And after creation, it's about monetization. How do you monetize it? Um, I would say this, without that map, you cannot really control anything. So
Mhm.
you need to have a designing approach, really. That's my view.
I think it's a very
And
good start, very clever
sorry, go
answer.
ahead, Margaret. Yeah.
I entirely agree with you. It's the beginning of it all. You cannot plan the route if you don't have the map first.
It's like driving without roads, you know. It's like driving without roads, you know. Then
Absolutely.
you have to go outside the normal road. So that leads me actually to ask a question to the audience. We spoke about a map, you know. The question is, do you currently have a clear map of your intellectual property flow? So that's the big question is, uh, A, yes, you have a map. B, partially. C, not at all. And, you know, feel free to, you know, express yourself on this. The floor is all yours. So feel free to write comments. Feel free to tell us what you think about this, because we know that this is where a big value can be added by really you know, transforming um, everything with a design approach. Yeah.
Another very provocative question today, Matteo.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a very smart point, and I think the answers could be surprising. Most importantly, this is where everything connects back to valuation. This is the initial starting point, right? So Matteo, what is the difference between a business that controls its IP and one that doesn't?
Yeah. The difference is that one will attract capital, the other negotiate price. Um, I would mention about something that I actually brought out last year here on LinkedIn is if you control IP, you are 1020% more likely to be funded. That's a statistic that came from Europe. I took this to LinkedIn. I wrote a LinkedIn post last year. Obviously, some time ago. I met also an IP expert, and you know that was quite clear about the statistic. Um, yeah, but that leads me to ask you a question as well, Margaret. Would you agree that licensing, given what we're talking about today, licensing is one of the fastest way to increase valuation multiples?
Absolutely. It's one very smart model to signal scalability and predictability immediately to the markets. Whether it's a bank or whether you want to sell your business, this is a very smart way to get the most out of it. Um, we're gonna ask the audience to participate one last time. One last question for today. If you had to increase your valuation in the next 12 months, what would you prioritize? Option A, revenue growth. Option B, cost reductions. Option C, IP licensing and control. Please think around the conversation that we just had today, the discussions, everything that was explained by Matteo, by myself. And let me repeat the options again. Option A, revenue growth. Option B, cost reduction. Option C, IP licensing and control. Please type your answers in the comments. We're going to be looking forward to get those.
Yeah, I sense that the the usual voice that we hear a lot everywhere, social media, is you need to grow your revenue, which there's nothing wrong about it, you know. However, what about quality of revenue? It's really, that's also very, very important, you know, because there is revenue and revenue, yeah. Clearly, IP licensing and control will give you, yeah, will give you a strong push towards your valuation, towards fundability of your business, of course, yeah. So yeah, interesting to see the answer to this question about what's in the audience mind when it comes to priority, either revenue growth, cost reduction, IP licensing, and control. And I personally feel like saying something quite strongly there as a conclusion, really. Um, the conclusion is that ownership is not enough, really. Even protection is not enough because, again, you need to be linked to commercial outcome. um, what you need is effectively three things. First of all, you need control. Okay. Then you need structure, and then you need monetization. Okay. So to me, this is a takeaway for today. Very strong one. Many people, they might think, you know, this is quite new to them. But yeah, you need to really think beyond just legal IP. You need to understand that your IP is not static. Your IP is dynamic.
Absolutely. I think your message is quite clear, Matteo. In an AI-driven world, and let's be honest about it, there's no escaping the stage. Value is not what you own. It's what you can control, what you can scale, and what you can license.
Yeah, and I can say this, if this conversation has shifted how you see your business, uh, you're already moving in the right direction. And the book we presented earlier on with the 90 seconds has 26 scorecards that are designed to help you to identify intellectual property, protect intellectual property, license it, and turn it into a valuation engine. So do not hesitate. And we are happy to, we will read all your comment, to reply to all your comment. Send us all your direct messages about your question. And if you're interested in participating into a scorecard approach, you know, well, we can give you a scorecard about your intellectual property in general. So you can actually request it uh, either by direct message, either by putting a comment down, say, I want a scorecard, we'll deliver it to you. And after you complete the scorecard, we'll give you a diagnostic, okay? A diagnostic that will help you move forward with your business.
Very generous gift. Matteo. Okay. So next session, we're going to bring this to life. Um, do you have any last comments before we close, Matteo? Any last minute insights that you would like to share with the audience?
What I would say is we're going to bring real case studies, um, real valuation shifts, real transformation. We're not talking about giving you any some type of minor information here, and real monetization strategies. Yeah, so we are here really to transform your business in AI-driven economies. This is for us fundamental. That's the promise.
Thank you so much, Matteo. Um, thank you everybody for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next week as well. Have a great week ahead.
Thank you. Bye.